We got 5 new unique augments today, and all of these ships were bad. Now, which ones have become good? You can find a summary on my augment guide / tier list link in the description, and there's a rubric here. It's hidden at first in case you don't want to read it every time. But for example, York here, spoiler alert, her augment is quite strong, but since after the augment she's still quite shit, she gets a D tier in worth and in new player worth as well. But let's go into more details, starting with the craziest one, whose name I can't pronounce, Köln. Here's the data mine, not made by me. So here, you can't really tell by the skill text, but when you data mine and look at the code, it's crazy. There are a total of 10 possible barrages, and they seem to all be stolen from other Ironblood ships. So every 20 seconds, she has an 80% chance to fire one of the 10 barrages, and let's look at them in this shoddy simulation. So this one, I think it's Z23. This one is obviously Z52. This one, I don't know. If you can read the Chinese in the upper left corner and know what it is, then great. This one's mains. This is, I don't know. This is Heinrich, probably. This one, I don't know. I also don't know this. And this one's HR. So that's 10. And overall, I think this augment is a huge buff to her, but being a weak gray ship to start with, even a huge buff doesn't make her better than bad. But the augment seems quite fun. Now, York gains some stat bonuses like a bit more firepower and some crit rate to all of her attacks. But her skill still has an internal cooldown of 10 seconds, so don't expect to be spamming this new barrage. And the barrage is aimed, and you can essentially treat it as 100% geometric hit rate, but it only accounts for about 10% of her total damage. And overall, the augment gives York around 30% more damage, which brings her from complete shit tier up to shit tier. Now, Massachusetts here. Massachusetts has her distance skill go from 30% to 50% more damage at max. But against typical bosses, you don't actually get the max. So it used to be about 24%, now it's about 40% more damage. So that's a 13% multiplicative damage increase. Also, the game no longer checks her secondary gun for being equal union, which means that if you want to use Massachusetts against light armor bosses, you will have to remove her unique augment and go back to purple. The new barrage has a 50% chance, and it's quite mid. It ends up doing about 8% of her total damage. So overall, the augment is about 26% more damage, which brings her from shit tier up to decent gold tier battleship, like Warspite. And Warspite is far more expensive, but she can actually be used against light bosses, but neither of them are recommended for new or mid-game players. Sovetskaya Rossiya has a soft requirement in her other skill for Northern Parliament or Dragon Emperor allies for her first 2 battles. And now this skill, which got improved by the augment, now requires at least one other Northern Parliament ally. That new requirement is fine because she would have been shit anyways if playing without those allies. And now she gets 10% crit rate and 20% crit damage, which comes out to be about 10% more damage. And she also gets another 7.5% firepower, and then 15% more firepower, which is approximately another 10% more damage. And finally, her barrage chance increases to 100% after 2 salvos. I believe this doesn't apply to the second salvo. Let's just say that's 5% more damage. And I'm too lazy to calculate the actual damages. So overall, about 25% more damage, which makes it a decent augment and takes her from shit tier up to shit tier. Now, Fubuki, the last one, Fubuki has some huge buffs to all destroyers now, 30% firepower and evasion, and 20% more torp for all destroyers. It's like Z1's 40% firepower, evasion, and anti-air buff for Z destroyers, but it applies to all destroyers again. So Fubuki can act as a good buffer for another destroyer that you want to stack damage on. Like, you can put Mogador with Aurora and Fubuki and watch her do insane damage, which is not very useful in endgame content, but it's nice and fun. So yeah, overall, fun augment, but not good for new players.